Chapter 3. The best is the life. Think a great reason why the quality of a happiness and contentment is escaping so many lives is that we have lost, to a great extent, the sense of proportion. We are concerned and absorbed with so many things that are merely means to an end, instead of with the end itself. Not that these are not of importance, but they are, after all, merely means, and they can never have any importance other than merely relative. We are concerned more with the fixings of life and the means of ever increasing them than we are with the life itself. And, after all, we can never get away from the fact, except at the expense always of a great personal loss, and many times even at our peril, that the life is the thing. We can't dwell too continually in the lower stories of our being without missing the still better things that are in the stories above. And somehow there is in the very center of our being, so to speak, a something that continually beckons us above. If we heed its call and go voluntarily, we find new pleasures and joys and satisfactions, such as, somehow or other, would not last when we were staying below. Then, if we are not wise enough to go voluntarily, we invariably are pushed. There is no such thing as standing still in life and enjoying the higher forms of happiness. Life and its possibilities of unfoldment and growth is such a wonderful thing that we are missing the transcendent beauties and the lasting satisfactions and possessions that lie in the upper strata of our being, as long as we are careless enough to allow them to escape us. This seems to be a fixed and inevitable law of our being. It is, therefore, a part of both wisdom and happiness if we concern ourselves more with the life itself than to become so thoroughly absorbed in some mere phase or contingent of life. Why is it that we have such an instinctive regard for such names as those of Emerson, Lincoln, Whitman, Drummond, St. Francis of Assisi, Harriet Beecher Stowe? Because they were primarily concerned with, and, therefore, engaged in, those things that pertain to life. Said a noted preacher to a large group of businessmen some time ago, "There are many ways of being busy in this world, but there is only one business here. The great affair of man is living. It is not merely the earning of a wage, nor the making of money, nor beating one's rivals, nor electing one's candidate. It is the process of turning environment and endowments into character. It is making manhood." And, again, the name of Emerson will outlive those of all our men of many millions. If you would build yourself the most lasting monument among men, make your name a synonym for honor, for justice, for brotherly kindness. Undoubtedly many of us, I believe the most of us, unconsciously, we grant in many cases, have lost a due sense of proportion and adjustment. We will all perhaps readily admit that there is much of truth in the following. We are concerned with many things, perplexed on all sides by the rush of events. Do we ever consider the madness of this activity and its unfairness to our highest good? Many of us in America have lost completely our sense of proportion in regard to the question of activity. We believe that the man who is constantly working is the man who is doing things. Commercially speaking, we are doing things, for the peasant in the remote villages of Europe speaks of the many industries in America. Has the present glory not obscured the deeper and richer conception of life? Have we not forgotten that the enduring things arise from a development of the inner life? Many of us are using the husks and throwing away the corn. As the individuals are, so will the nation be. It was Emerson who said, "Thus do all." From a review of The Richer Life, by Walter A. Dyer. Things preach the indifference of circumstances. The man is all, and was he not right? Whatever channel the mind sets itself in, the life will follow, for it is invariably true that the life always follows the thought. It has been said that a man is known by absorption, meaning that we can tell the quality and type of anyone's life by the things he allows to absorb him. It is true that the common man is the man who allows himself to be absorbed completely by the common, and by common I mean the purely material, things of life, boards, bricks, crops, lands, markets, business, food, clothing. All of these we readily admit are important. But unless a man can rise above these in thought, in mind, in spirit, in appreciation and enjoyment, now and then, he is regarded by his neighbors as a common man. That is why a man who may be worth many millions, but who has neither appreciation nor ability for the enjoyment of things beyond his millions, is a very common man. Among the most thoroughly self-deluded people in the world are those who think that in the multiplication of things and possessions happiness or contentment lies. It is that matchless contemporary writer and clear thinker, Edward Carpenter, who has said, "Life is an art, and a very fine art. One of its first necessities is that you should not have more material in it, more chairs and tables, servants, houses, lands, bank shares, friends, acquaintances, and so forth, than you can really handle. It is no good pretending that you are obliged to have them. You must cut that nonsense short. If one's life is to be expressive, one does not want lumber in it. It must not be full of things that mean nothing or that mean the wrong thing. Life is so much more interesting than boards and bricks, than lands and business blocks, and even bank accounts, and the men who are thoroughly interested in life are always of more account, and are always of greater value to the world, as well as to themselves, than the men who are interested only in these. That is why a very eminent corporation lawyer, in a notable address some time ago, said, "It is because I believe so strongly in the saving power of the intellectual life upon the institutions of society and upon the welfare of individuals, that I plead so earnestly for it. The fortunes of science, art, literature, and government are indissolubly linked with it. The centers and shrines of the most potent influences are not the seats of commerce and capital. The village of Concord, where Emerson, Hawthorne, Alcott, and Thoreau lived, was, in their day, and will long continue to be, a greater force in this nation than New York and Chicago added to each other. We may rest in the assured faith that, whoever may seem to rule, the thinker is, and always will be, the master." We can readily see what he meant, and can we say that he was not right? We cannot help admiring the ability of the man who has the ability for the accumulating of wealth. It is an ability of value, as all executive, administrative, and financial ability always is. If he stopped there, however, he is, so to speak, but half a man. There is, moreover, a great and distinct loss to the community and to the nation. There is also a distinct loss to himself. His community, his country, his fellow men stand in too great a need of such splendid abilities. It is little short of marvelous to think what a few men with these splendid equipments, scattered throughout our various communities and cities and states, could do for civic, for community, for human advancement, were they to throw these energies as actively along these lines as they have thrown them into their various lines of business. It is wonderfully interesting and even fascinating. I know the operation of large business, the feeling of accomplishment, of achievement. But, after all, it is boards and bricks, rails and ties, packing boxes, checks and receipts, and they are inanimate and sensible things. They do not, after all, pertain to the real life, and, moreover, they will all soon have to be left behind. You have had the enjoyment of making, now experience the greater joy of using. No greater joy can come to any man than to use his means and his abilities while he still lives in connection with human needs and the advancing of human welfare, instead of putting the time and the energy and the accumulations into more business blocks that are not really needed, and that very common men will gladly build, and that, moreover, in a very few years will become dingy and out of date, and that will be pulled down to give place to something different, something more attractive and up to date. Put them into life, individual, collective. There is no deep and abiding satisfaction for a man on account of big business, on account of large accumulations, on account of large achievements along these lines. It is only if he stop there, and if nothing further can be said of him, that determines whether he is really successful and whether he is actually rich or poor. Said Jane Addams recently, "Nothing so deadens the sympathies and shrivels the power of enjoyment as the persistent keeping away from the great opportunities for helpfulness and a continual ignoring of the starvation struggle which makes up the life of at least half the race. If a man is mastered by his business, he is little different in reality from the man who is mastered by his whiskey bottle. It is merely another exhibition of human weakness. It is merely a species of obsession. It is, indeed, interesting what creatures of habit we may become, all unconsciously but quite inevitably, if we are not capable of preserving a sense of proportion in life. Mankind is advancing. It is attaining to an ever higher standing ground, and it is placing those who are incapable of the things of the mind and spirit, the imagination and the heart, on a very ordinary plane. No, the best is the life, the things of the mind and spirit. They will buy out all the world at last. Why? Because they are the things that are real, the things that will last, the only things that eventually really count. It's the thinker and the man of broad, unself-centered, sympathetic impulses that always will lead, and that always will be recognized as the leader. Several years ago there came to my notice a little book, by a man of affairs, that dealt with such remarkable insight and such persuasion of expression with the matter immediately in hand, that I have recently gone to it again, to see if it, as we say, still stands. I find it does, and I wish I had the right, and the opportunity, did space allow, to reproduce it in its entirety here. I speak only of the life that now is, how its highest compensations can be won, its rewards, if you please, attained. its sorrows mitigated, and its joys increased and multiplied. And this is the lesson I would give: dwell in the kingdom of light. And where is that kingdom? What are its boundaries? What cities are built within it? What hills and plains and mountain slopes gladden the eyes of its possessors? Be patient. Do not hasten to search for it. It is here. The kingdom of light, like the kingdom of God, is within you. And what do I mean by the kingdom of light? I mean that realm of which a quaint old poet sang those quaint old lines: "My mind to me a kingdom is, such perfect joy therein I find, as far exceeds all earthly bliss." Mean that invisible commonwealth which outlives the storms of ages, that state whose armaments are thoughts, whose weapons are ideas, whose trophies are the pages of the world's great masters. The kingdom of light is the kingdom of the intellect, of the imagination, of the heart, of the spirit, and the things of the spirit. The kingdom of light is open to all who seek the light. This may appear a mere truism, since everyone admits the superiority of the mental over the physical nature. But that is where the danger lies. All admit it, but how few act upon it. How many men and women do you know who, after they have, as the phrase goes, finished their education, ever give a serious thought to their mental growth? They have no time to live, but only to exist. Do not misunderstand me. I do not expect, nor do I think it possible, that the great majority of people can make intellectual improvement their first or only aim. God's wisdom has made the law that man must dig and delve, must work with his hands, and bend his back to the burden that is laid upon it. We must have bread, but how inexpressibly foolish it is to suppose we can live by bread alone. Granting all that can be claimed for lack of time, for the food and clothing to be bought, and the debts to be paid, the truth remains, and I beg you to remember it. The person who allows his mental and spiritual nature to stagnate and decay does so not for want of time, but for want of inclination. The farm, the shop, and the office are not such hard masters as we imagine. We yield too easily to their sway, and set them up as rulers when they ought to be only servants. There is no vocation, absolutely none, that cuts off entirely the opportunities for intellectual development. The kingdom of light is an especially delightful home for him whose purse is not of sufficient weight to provide a home elsewhere, and a humble cottage in the kingdom can be made to shine with a brightness above palace walls. For my part, one would rather have been Charles Lamb than the Duke of Wellington, and his influence in the world is incalculably the greater of the two. And yet he was but a clerk in the India House, poor in pocket, but rich beyond measure in his very poverty, whose jewels are not in the goldsmith's list. The problem of life is to rightly adjust the prose to the poetry, the sordid to the spiritual, the common and selfish to the high and beneficent, forgetting not that these last are incomparably the more precious. I may be wrong, but I cannot help thinking that neither here nor hereafter does salvation lie in wheat, or corn, or iron. Again, I must plead that you take my words as I mean them. I do not preach a gospel of mere sentiment, nor of inane, impracticable dilettantism. The Lord put it in my way to learn, long ago, that we cannot eat poetry, or art, or sunbeams. And yet I hold it true, now and always, that life without these things is shorn of more than half its value. The ox and his master differ little in dignity if neither rises above the level of the stomach or the manger. But in the kingdom of light, in the life I am saying we ought to lead, nothing can be taken from us that can be compared with what we shall receive. Some there are, no doubt, who believe that intellectual culture does not make men better or happier, and that the conscience and moral faculties are set apart from merely mental attributes. But surely you have not accepted such a false and narrow view. Unless colleges are a foolish and expensive luxury, unless civilization is worthless, unless the centuries that have witnessed the upward stride of humanity have been wasted, unless the savage, chattering incantations to his fetish, is a nobler product of the race than a Milton, a Wilberforce, an Emerson, or a Lowell, then heart and mind, morality and education do go together in true and loyal companionship. The trouble of today, as I have tried to show, is not that we have too much culture, but too much bending of the knee to purely material results, too much worship of the big, and not enough of the great. When I hear the glorification of the last 20 years of the fields subdued, the roads rebuilt, the fortunes accumulated, the factories started, I say to myself, all these are good, but not so good that we should make ourselves hoarse with huzzahs, or that we should suppose for a moment they belong to the higher order of achievement. End of chapter.